Hi, this is Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy with WCCO TV, and today we're going to look at the issue of President Trump's popularity and the controversy surrounding his executive orders. Officials at the Minnesota Republican Party say their members are thrilled across the board with the president's policies. Alex Plekish, the chair of the Minnesota GOP, told us the latest CBS News poll confirms what we're seeing across the country and right here in Minnesota. Momentum is on our side. Support for President Trump and the Republican message continues to grow. And a new CBS News poll shows that's actually true nationally. The president has his highest popularity ever in a CBS News poll this month, with 53% of those surveyed approving of the job he's doing, 47% disapproving. 70% of those surveyed say they believe President Trump is fulfilling his campaign promises. And on specific issues like immigration, the survey found that 59% of those surveyed support his policies on undocumented immigrants. Joining us to talk about the legal and constitutional questions here surrounding the president's executive orders is our friend, constitutional law professor David Schultz. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Esme. Thanks for having me again.
And you've told me that you've never been more popular, that suddenly, as a constitutional law expert, suddenly everybody wants to talk to you and get your opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say, contrary to what it was like in high school, here now actually people want to hear what I have to say, and I seem to be sought out. So Who knows?
Well, there are a lot of issues here. I don't know where you want to start, but there are a lot of questions about this administration. One that was really raised and emphasized here this past weekend was judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. That was on X from Vice President JD Vance. That's created a lot of controversy. Jump on in, Dave.
Okay. One of the most fundamental positions or legal principles in American law is the idea that we have things like limited power for all branches of government. And we all learned somewhere along the line about checks and balances, separation of powers. All that's important. But we also learned somewhere along the line here that the judiciary has the final say regarding what the Constitution means. That is about the most bedrock principle that we learn in constitutional law and about as basic as it can possibly be. And so when the vice president says that the courts do not have the right to be able to tell the president or the executive branch wants to do, first, he's just wrong in terms of legal history and principle, but also we could cite many, many cases in which, in fact, we have the courts reviewing the constitutionality of what presidents do and what the executive branch does over time. If I'm going to pick the most famous example, if I want to pick in terms of it here, it's going to be what? When Richard Nixon was president of the United States, he refused to turn over the Watergate tapes. He was eventually subpoenaed, and the Supreme Court said, you must turn those over to Congress and to a special prosecutor. So there is a very, very long line of cases that go against what Vance says. And as somebody who went to law school, he should know that there's a case called Marbury versus Madison. For anybody who's a law student out there who's gone to law school, they know that case. Marbury versus Madison establishes the principle over 200 years ago that it's the courts that get to make the decision about what's constitutional.
Okay. So the courts are already intervening. Tell us about the court interventions that you find most striking.
The ones that I find the most interesting are on a host of areas that actually do involve administrative law. These are cases where Trump has used executive orders to try to do things like stop USAID, to try to remove websites, from the Centers for Disease Control. And there's a whole framework of law out there that says that, yes, presidents have some authority to issue some executive orders within a limited bound. But if they're going to do so, they have to do so in terms of how they follow the law or follow the Constitution or within the power that's delegated to them. The way I describe this to my students is that there are some things that presidents can do as president that doesn't require any authority from Congress, but most of the powers, or a lot of the powers that modern presidents have, is powers that have been delegated to them by Congress. And therefore, Congress can stipulate both what the president can do and how the president can do it. And this is where the courts are stepping in right now, saying, you as president have exceeded your authority. In the case of, let's say, birthright citizenship, the Constitution says birthright citizenship is a matter of constitutional law. You can't do that. In terms of some of these other things, it's about process. It's about how the president isn't following the rules of law that are dictating how he's supposed to do certain things.
Let me ask you about the issue of popularity. I suppose that probably doesn't find its way into the world of constitutional law, but the polls show, at least this new CBS poll shows, that 70% of those surveyed, and this isn't just Republicans, this is all people surveyed, think that the president is following through on campaign promises. His approval rating is above 50%. What about that? I mean, does that come into play here? I mean, should we be surprised that people overall support this, even though there's a lot of objections from Democrats in Washington?
Well, first off, we shouldn't be surprised. One of the criticisms of Joe Biden was the fact that he did not look like he was an active president or really very, very much engaged. And we know that the American public really likes presidents who are taking charge. And so on that score, Donald Trump, it doesn't surprise me in terms of his approval. But popularity of executive orders or popularity of the law is not supposed to impact whether or not it's constitutional or not. And the basic way of thinking about it may be the fact that the whole purpose, for example, of the First Amendment, things such as freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, is that even if the book that I'm reading is unpopular, the speech that I have is unpopular, just because the public doesn't like it, I have a constitutional right to do what? To go hang out in front of the courthouse and say, I think all public officials are corrupt, or I have a right to practice an unpopular religion if I want to do so. So from a technical legal perspective here, popularity does not address the issue of constitutionality. And there's been lots of things over time that have been very, very popular that the courts have struck down as saying that you do not have a right to tell minorities. You do not have a right to tell people who marched, let's say, to the proverbial beat of a different drummer. You do not have a right to tell them what to do, no matter how popular that may be.
Let me ask you about immigration, because this same poll shows that 59% of those surveyed nationally do support the president's actions on immigration, including swift and immediate deportations of those that are undocumented. In terms of his immigration policies, is this something that is legal and constitutional, and will it hold up in court because it's already being challenged?
Well, again, here we have, if we're going to deport people, if we're going to remove people from the United States, even if they're not here legally, they have a right in many cases to be able to challenge their deportation. They can argue that they are here under asylum, or they're here under, let us say, rules that allow them to seek citizenship or at least residency in the United States. And so under the framework of law that we have out here, many of these people are going to be entitled to court hearings, going to be entitled to some type of due process. And therefore, just rounding up the usual suspects or just rounding up people and just pushing them out of the country, it faces lots of legal challenges, and especially also if now these people are being targeted on the base of, let's say, their race or their ethnicity or their skin color. That then raises a whole bunch of other issues too.
Even if they're not U.S. citizens?
Even if they're not U.S. citizens, correct. Yeah, I mean, what you're getting at also here is a good question here regarding what rights do non-citizens have in the United States, especially those who are not here legally. The law is not, we don't have a clear, unequivocal answer that tells us what the answer is all the time. But we do know that if you're in the United States, you are afforded the protections of U.S. law. You are afforded basic rights in terms of, again, due process. You have a right not to be discriminated against.
All right. Well, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of legal issues and a lot of work for constitutional lawyers over the next few years. David Schultz, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Esme.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. Please reach out to me with any comments or suggestions. Thanks for watching Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.